I want to talk about work and, in particular, workers' rights, because that's what our next guest is dedicated to as president of the National Right to Work Committee and National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, Mark Mix. Mark Mix, welcome to the program, sir.
Hey, Rich. It's good to be on with you. Thanks for the opportunity, and I'm excited to chat with you a little bit across the whole nation, as I understand it, right?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. From New York straight to Alaska. So I saw a quote here. I know you appeared recently in front of a Senate committee, and one of the remarks that you made, I have a quote here. It says, "The idea of individual freedom and choice is a fundamental principle of who we are as a country. Yet labor law destroys that fundamental volunteerism." Explain that to us.
Yeah, Rich, it's really an amazing anomaly when you think about this grand experiment in self-government that's predicated on the protection of individual freedom and individual rights as articulated in the Bill of Rights. I mean, it's amazing that if we go back on a quick journey back to the 1930s, we find a United States federal government that used a significant financial crisis to dramatically expand their power over the American workplace. And what they did is they basically made labor policy, the labor relations between private sector workers and private sector employers, basically a award of the federal government. Previous to this, the states had their own laws, their tort laws and other laws about how employees would deal with their employers and vice versa. But the federal government, Roosevelt decided he wanted the federal government to basically dictate the terms and conditions of employment across the nation. And so they tried initially with what was called the National Industrial Recovery Act, the NRA, and that passed the House, passed the Senate, signed by President Roosevelt, and it went up on a constitutional question to the U.S. Supreme Court and was struck down. Well, Roosevelt was never one to give up, and he basically said, let's try it again, and they reintroduced a bill that was almost exactly the same thing. This time it was called the Wagner Act. And it passed the House, it passed the Senate, and when it went to President Roosevelt, he had one of his fireside chat radio shows, and he talked about the tired old men of the Supreme Court. And obviously, he knew, and Americans knew, that the Article 3 of the Constitution does not dictate the size of the Supreme Court. It just says there shall be one. So what Roosevelt said in his fireside chat was, you know, everyone who's over the age of 70, as Don Lemon would say, past their prime, clearly, needed an associate justice. And at that point, Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes and Associate Justice Orrin Roberts switched their votes from against this federal usurpation of individual freedom and states' rights, and basically said this was A-OK. And so in 1937, in this case, they decided it was now constitutional. And immediately, Rich, you can see just how dramatically increased union membership was across the country, because what they said is you could be forced to join a union, and not only could you be forced to join a private organization, but you would be forced to pay dues or fees in order to keep your job. So from 1937 to 1946, the union movement grew exponentially. And the predicate, the base of our labor policy, is one based on compulsion and force. It says that union officials have the ability to compel you to accept their representation even though you didn't vote for it, didn't want it, didn't ask for it. You can be compelled to be forced to associate with an organization against your will. And we know that under the elements of common law, you know, as you look at the elements of a contract, there has to be 4 elements. You know, you have to have an agreement, a meeting of the minds. There has to be consideration. There has to be no duress, and it has to be legal. Well, labor policy violates at least 3 of those provisions. Unfortunately, it's legal based on this 1930s labor policy that literally says you can be fired from your job if you don't pay dues or fees to a private organization, i.e. a labor union. So that's how we got here, and that's what I was talking about at the hearing that Bernie Sanders chaired, was this idea of individual freedom and how the power of labor unions in this country has grown so out of control that they have this compulsory force unionism power.
Well, that was a lot. Thanks for encapsulating that. No, really. No, I actually appreciate it. There's a bunch of steps there, because I think it underscores the point of your organization in right to work. And that was really the crux of what you just explained, how it wasn't anti-union per se, right? It was really about the forced aspect of it, this compulsion that you speak of, where, and I think outside of a political benefit, and by that I mean, for example, I worked in the state of New Jersey, and had I been a regular employee that was civil service, I likely would have had this compulsion, where I had to be a part of the union. But because I was a political appointee of the governor's, I was exempt from that. And I actually couldn't be in the union. I think that's how they put it. And it was just interesting the way that works out. But, people who aren't involved in politics or government or anything else that are just, living their day-to-day lives, they go through this on a regular basis. And not the least of which I think are teachers. And I don't want to derail the conversation into a focus of education. But this is something that we see in public schools very often, where I've met many teachers who say, look, I love being a teacher. I enjoy this profession. I don't like the union. I don't like what they stand for, but you've kind of got to be with them. And there's very few districts that or states even that allow this right to work. And so I think the work that you're doing is very important.
Yeah, Rich, that is obviously one of the places where the power of unions has manifested itself. Obviously, just recently, when you think about COVID, and you think about the shutdown of our government school system, and you think about, parents looking over the shoulder of their children at a computer screen where they're hearing and seeing what's being taught in the schools, and all of a sudden there is an immediate outrage that kind of spreads across the country. And it really started here in Virginia, in Loudoun County. I mean, obviously there were other elements of what happened out there as it relates to how the school board was hiding, basically criminal activity in one case, for example, and parents got wind of this and they got outraged. And when you had a candidate for governor by the name of Terry McAuliffe, who had been a governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia before and was running for a second term, you can't run two in a row, so he was skipped one or two and ran again. And when he said that basically parents shouldn't be involved in decision making about their kids' education, Governor Youngkin, now Governor Glenn Youngkin, jumped on that with both feet and woke up a whole new constituency of parents, whether they were left or right or conservative or liberal. They were concerned about what was going on. And one of the things we learned about that, Rich, and to your point about New Jersey is probably one of the worst states. I mean, everybody up there, except for political appointees, is forced into union representation. And so Governor Youngkin jumped on that, and it became a real issue. And it continues to resonate today. And I think the educational system is going to change, but the teachers union is kind of the biggest manifestation of that power in action. When you see Randy Weingarten standing up, pounding the table and screaming her head off and talking about all these things that have nothing to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic, people get concerned. And that's one of the elements of the power of unionization. The good news, though, Rich, is that we won a U.S. Supreme Court case back in 2018, a case called Janus v. AFSCME. AFSCME is the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, that said no government employee anywhere in America at any level could be compelled to pay fees in order to work for their government. And to your point, Rich, one of the things they said was everything that government unions do is political, and therefore it's political speech, and therefore it's protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. So that's a big win, but that information has to get out to government employees and teachers across the nation. So thanks for bringing that up. It is important.
Yeah, well, I think it is. Well, I want to remind everybody who we're on with Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Committee. And I still even haven't gotten my first question out, but I will. I promise I will. We're going to do that straight ahead because I want to get a couple of things from you. One, I want to talk to you a little bit about your interactions with Bernard Sanders, the great senator from Vermont, as well as the story that's developing in Michigan about Governor Whitmer trying to repeal the Right to Work Act in her state, and the movement against that saying, no, leave it alone. So we'll get to that in a moment. Plus your calls, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDES. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you for everything. I know you very well, and I listen, but I have a lot of people that listen, and they love your show, and I appreciate it very much.
America at Night with Rich Valdes.
All right, America, welcome back. And we're looking at this developing story in Michigan where the right to work has been a cornerstone of a plan to make it a top 10 state for business. But the repeal of that law would be a step backwards. And this is the current situation on the ground in Michigan. I want to go to Kim, who's on the phone calling from Michigan, with a quick comment. Kim, go right ahead. You're on with Rich Valdes and Mark Mix.
Hi, Rick. Hi, Rich and Mark. I wanted to bring that up. That since we lost this last election really bad, they're trying to repeal that, and they're calling people freeloaders. That it just makes it harder with the right to work. It doesn't come out of their paycheck. Somebody has to write a check for their dues to their union, and if they don't want to, they don't have to. But because we're almost all Democrat here, they want to take that right away from people, and it's going to hurt us. Do I have time to ask another question?
Well, we'll put it right there for now just to make sure we have enough time to get the response from Mark Mix. Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's going to happen tomorrow. The House of Representatives last week basically passed the repeal of right to work. It went from a committee right to the floor, and it was voted out on the House floor. The Senate's going to take up the bill tomorrow morning, and they're going to have it in committee and pass it out of committee probably around 11 o'clock. They will put it on the Senate floor probably around 2, and by probably 3 o'clock with a time limit on the debate, they will have it heading to Governor Whitmer's desk, and she has indicated she's going to sign it. And immediately, when the legislature adjourns and it goes into effect, money will be taken out of the paychecks of every single automotive worker in Michigan who has heretofore decided they didn't want to support the United Auto Workers Union for one, and that will happen. And if they don't pay, if they don't agree that, they will lose their job. Michigan's been one of, as you mentioned, Rich, one of the engines of manufacturing job growth and private sector job growth in the country over the last 10 years. The previous 10 years prior to Right to Work's passage and prior to Governor Snyder's agenda as making Michigan open for business again, they have been really successful in growing manufacturing jobs, growing private sector jobs, and this is basically going to set them back. And the states, the work will go to the other 26 Right to Work states in the country. Michigan's going to miss out on that, all because the Democrats took over, and the first thing they're going to do in a big policy is they're going to force workers to pay union dues to keep their jobs in Michigan.
Makes a lot of sense. And this is important now, just based on, you keeping your ear to the ground and being at the forefront of this movement, Mark Mix. What's your take on how this actually plays out tomorrow?
Well, it's going to pass. They've got the votes. The bill the bill that's designed to repeal the right to work law. Every single Democrat senator has co-sponsored the bill, and they have a 20 to 18 majority in the Senate. So there's 2 votes, and of course the lieutenant governor would break a tie if that's the case. But yeah, it's pretty certain. They're pretty certain. In fact, I think the AFL-CIO has reserved the Capitol steps for tomorrow and for Thursday. So it may be that Governor Whitmer doesn't sign it until Thursday, but the Senate probably is going to pass the repeal tomorrow afternoon.
Wow. Now let's circle back quickly to your experience in the Senate hearing where you testified in front of the committee, the Help Committee. Tell us. Did you feel that your comments were well received? I know that you were there alongside the heads of unions like the Teamsters and AFL-CIO. Did they say, "Hey, man, it's great to have Mark Mix here"?
Well, probably not, Rich. I thought we made an impact, and we submitted testimony talking about the work that our foundation does on behalf of workers. We literally represent tens of thousands of workers who object to being compelled to pay dues or fees to a private organization they disagree with. And so I had some of those stories in my testimony, and we talked about individual freedom, and basically it just bounced off of Chairman Sanders and the rest of the Democrats on the committee. They want to talk about repealing all the right to work laws with federal law, a bill called the so-called PRO Act that is alleged to basically protect your right to organize, which is already written into federal law. It was written into that federal law we talked about in the first segment about the Wagner Act and the National Labor Relations Act. So it's just about power and it's about money. Rich, unions are a $25 billion a year business. They invest literally billions every 2 years in politics, and you might be able to guess which party benefits from those billions of political spending.
Yeah, and their allies in the media, which leads me to, I guess, my next question, perhaps my final question, given the clock. But I'm going to guess, and maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am, but I know that I saw that you had your testimony just recently in Washington. I said, that's a topic we should probably discuss. It's not one we hear about often on the news, and we should probably, get a better sense of this. Did any of my counterparts in radio or even print journalism, from the New York Times or the Washington Post, did anybody contact you to do an in-depth interview on this topic?
No, they didn't. And it's because we got overwhelmed by an argument between Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma and Sean O'Brien, the Teamster president. Those two had a pretty big oral argument, and Bernie Sanders almost broke the gavel trying to get them to come to order. They were arguing back and forth about lots of things. Senator Mullen was, talking about, why do you need to force people? Why do you do this? And Sean O'Brien objected to that line of questioning. So that was really the storyline of the hearing. That got most of the press. But no, Rich, to your point, this is something that the big establishment media doesn't want to talk about, because they know that 8 out of 10 Americans believe it's wrong to force workers into a private organization or pay union dues in order to get or keep a job in America. I mean, it's just wrong.
All right, Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Committee. Keep up the good work. I appreciate it. Hope you'll be back soon.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it.